and also for the offenders.
Call Chris Farfoy.
Mr Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the committee stage of the Administration of Community Sentences and Orders Bill. We find ourselves on this side of the House in the not too unfamiliar position of supporting the government in this piece of legislation. As the Minister did say, it is about improving the effectiveness of sentences that are served in the community, and I think that we'll find over time will be encouraging, where appropriate, sentences to be served more in the community. For a couple of reasons. The first being there is evidence that for those offenders who do have the opportunity to serve their sentences at home, that the recidivism rate is lower than those who do serve their sentences inside a prison, and I'll be able to talk to much more detail to that. And obviously for fiscal reasons, because we simply cannot continue to lock people up for long periods of time given the fiscal constraints that we do have at the moment, because as the Deputy Prime Minister has already pointed out, that our prison system is both a moral and fiscal failure, and we simply cannot afford to have the level of expenditure that the tracking for corrections is on now continue, and to make sure that we are being much more effective with our spending and our rehabilitation of those people who are sentenced is something that I think people on all sides of this House would want. Can I thank the number of submitters that gave their evidence to the Law and Order Select Committee. A Select Committee I no longer, unfortunately, have the pleasure of being on, and I do acknowledge the Chair of the Select Committee, who has just walked into the House, Jackie Dean, for the way in which this bill was handled during the Select Committee process. There were some odder moments during the Select Committee process when we were told about the difference between a square and a circle for the purposes of electronic monitoring of people who are on home detention. And for those who are wondering about that and how that may work, is that if someone is on electronic monitoring at home, the signal that is sent to the box, essentially, that makes sure that they stay at that residence, does send an electronic signal, which the signal is very much a circle. But there could be a patch outside of their residence where that circle does emanate out to. So technically they could be within the electronic zone of their monitoring, but technically outside of the address where... Don't ask me those kinds of questions, please. But technically they could be outside of the address where they were meant to be, but the electronic monitoring wouldn't be able to pick that up. So there were some interesting moments during the Select Committee process, and certainly some of those technicalities were ironed out. I did mention before about the rates of recidivism for those inmates or those offenders who were serving their sentence either in the community or in prisons, and there was a submission during the Select Committee process from the Salvation Army. And I'd like to refer to that now, where they quoted from some 2009 Ministry of Justice figures, saying that the Ministry had found that 23% of those on home detention in 2009 were reconvicted in the 12 months after they served their sentence, but conversely that 52.6% of those who served a custodial sentence in 2009 were reconvicted in the following 12 months. So there's certainly hard data from the Ministry of Justice that suggests those offenders who serve their sentence at home have a much better chance of not going on to reoffending. So the numbers there are quite stark. 23% of those who serve home detention sentence reconvicted of a crime in the 12 months after they served their sentence, and 52.6%, Mr Chair, of those who served a sentence inside a prison went on to reconvict. So there's good hard evidence why we should be reinvesting much more time, energy, and making sure it's a much more efficient and effective with our home detention sentences. Certainly there are some people, Mr Chair, that should be serving their sentences in a prison. They cannot be trusted to be at large or to be in the community when they are serving those sentences, and I think those numbers also bear that out. But for those who do have the privilege, and I guess it is a privilege, Mr Chair, that they serve their sentence with, Mr Chair?
Chris Farfoy.
Serve their sentence within our communities, the recidivism rate is much, much lower, and that's why I think, and we should give the credit where credit's due, that making sure that the community sentence regime is much, much more effective. There was a range of views during the Select Committee about whether or not there should be more investment in our prisons service from some people, but I think on this side of the House we would certainly like to see more focus on those community sentences and more investment in rehabilitation sentences as well. Not to say, Mr Chair, that there isn't good work going on within our prisons service on rehabilitation. There certainly is good stuff going on there, and I think the chairperson was, I think, part of the Law and Order Select Committee that may have visited some prisons where we saw some very good work, and I think and that was very starkly shown at some of the drug treatment units around the country, where there is some very good, intense work from not just prison staff, but outside agencies too, to make sure that some of the people, and these are hardened drug users who are in our prison service, are getting very intense drug treatment and support after they leave their prison sentences. And if there's one thing that I think we should be making much more of a priority, and that is wrapping around services for those inmates who have gone through, I think it is a 3-month course in these drug treatment units in our prisons, and then are released into the community after they serve their sentences. And we really need to make sure that the investment that we've made in them while they are in prisons doesn't go to waste when we release them, because many of them will go back into some of the same communities, some of the same situations that they have been released from, putting themselves into very similar situations which got them into trouble in the first place, and it would be a huge waste of time, energy. I guess a lot of, I guess we could say aroha, because some of these drug treatment courses are very much focused around the Māori culture, and to make sure that we are getting good bang for buck out of drug treatment units and other treatment that we're putting these inmates through, to make sure that we wrap services around them after they leave prison. Now, of course, there's a danger to that, because you'll get some of those who will say, well, we should just let them go out, they've served their sentence and we don't care about them. They are, of course, people who have broken the law. But I think if we're going to make an investment in these people, Mr Chair, to make sure that we're trying to get them back on the straight and narrow, off the drugs, off the alcohol, and getting them back into a place where they're not reoffending, we need to make sure that we are supporting them in our communities. That, Mr Chair, means fewer victims, and that's what I think everyone in this House would want, and that's why we should be making sure that there is much more intense post-release support for a lot of these people who are going through our drug treatment units. Mr Chair, just before I start concluding, I just want to go back to the usefulness of the community sentences that we are debating here in this bill. As I have said a couple of times now, the recidivism rate, that's not an easy word to say fast, the recidivism rate of those people who serve community sentences is almost, if not half, of those who serve prison sentences. It should be something that we look as a country to do much, much more of in the cases where it is possible and it is safe to do it, because it has been proven that those people who do serve community sentences don't reoffend as much as those who serve a prison sentence. It also gives the ability for those people to still be integrated within their community, to still be supported by their families or their support people in the community, and I think that is something that we should look to do much, much more to help rehabilitate these offenders. Of course, again, there is a fiscal argument to this as well. It is much, much cheaper. Of the $4 billion that is spent in the justice sector, I believe about 30% of it, Mr Chair, is spent on corrections. That is $1.2 billion, and that will grow if we don't do anything about it, and we must do something about it, and that's why community sentences are certainly one way, and making sure that they are efficient is a way that rehabilitation works. We make sure there's less reoffending, fewer victims, and making sure, of course, as I say, say the pennies are watched too, because it is $1.2 billion of taxpayer money that is going into the correction system. So we do support this piece of legislation, Mr Chair. It does make the community sentences much more efficient and effective, and that's why we'll continue to support it.
I call Jackie Dean.
I'm very happy to speak to the